Hi, my name's Nikolai, aka 56Miner, and today we're unboxing our August Premium Box. This month's box is all about product design. In this video, we'll talk about perspective, how to build complex shapes out of simple forms, and how to render value really efficiently. I'll also share some tips and tricks that I picked up while working with all the materials. Let's get into it. For our surface this month, we have the Borden & Riley Bristol Smooth Pad. This paper is super fun because it's a bit stiffer than traditional paper and it has a really smooth texture to it. This allows markers and pens to glide on that surface for really smooth lines. This month we're super excited to introduce you to a brand new product, and that's going to be the Olo marker. These markers contain two separate internal reservoirs, which allows us to have two different colors. So our colors this month are going to be Cool Gray 5 and Cool Gray 3. Our Cool Gray 3 marker is going to feature a chisel nib, which is great for consistent marks and filling in large areas. And our Cool Gray 5 features their brush tip, which is going to be good for organic marks and lines with a lot of line weight variance to them. Now, like a typical alcohol marker, these are going to be a wet medium. So if we're trying to reduce strokes or make consistent areas of colors, it's better to work fast while that ink is still wet. Now, unlike a traditional alcohol marker, these are going to have a larger internal well. So each side of the marker has a 2 mil well for the ink, which is about twice the amount of a typical marker. You can also replace the nibs on these markers, so they're a great investment. The next item in our box is going to be a Goldfaber sketching pencil in 4H. And for the eraser in this month's box, we have the Pentel Soft High Polymer Eraser. Now, the job of a product designer is to come up with the initial concept and bring a product to life. One of the ways they do that is showing an object in perspective. Taking an extra sheet of paper from our pad, I'm going to go in and establish a horizon line so I can set up a 1-point perspective grid. And I'm going to put my vanishing point right in the center of our paper. A vanishing point is where all of the lines of our box are going to recede to. So to create a cube in 1-point perspective, I'm going to start with a square and then add lines that recede back to that vanishing point. This is going to give my square more volume and transform it into a cube. And if you're new to working in perspective, you can always extend those lines all the way back to the vanishing point, as this is a great way to get a better understanding of the viewpoint that you're building. Once your box is established, you can go back in and erase the unnecessary lines. Now, there are several drawing techniques that product designers implement in their work, and one of those is going to be stacking. So here I'm using our initial box to build up another box so those planes are right flush next to each other. And because we're working in 1-point perspective, those receding lines will always go back to our vanishing point. Now, if you want to make perfect cubes or boxes, you can always use that extra sheet of paper. I'm going to do the rest of these freehand, as I think they come off a little bit more organic. Now, our next drawing technique is going to be floating. So this is just like stacking our boxes, but leaving a gap in between. Now, when stacking your boxes, you want to make sure your horizontal lines are parallel, otherwise you'll break the illusion of depth. Our next technique is going to be called interpenetration, and this is when you build two boxes so that they intersect with each other. So here I have a horizontal box and a vertical box, and I'm going to use the two in order to make it look like the vertical box is piercing through the horizontal one. And you can always use your paper if you need help connecting those lines. We can always take a box and round out one of the edges, and then I'll create a cylinder or a more rounded form. We can also use 1-point perspective to alter our cubes and to make more interesting shapes. So here I'm going to start with a cube, and then I'm going to cut out 2 half circles to make it more of an H shape. And because I know those lines recede back to my vanishing point, I can be confident that this is in correct 1-point perspective. Now, to take our cubes from a rough sketch to something that has more 3-dimensional form to it, I'm going to establish a light source. So for this, my light source is going to be a bit towards the midground, so the front of all of my cubes is going to be outside of the light. So this means that all of my front-facing planes are going to be filled in with our Cool Gray 3, and all of our planes that are in shadow are going to be filled in with our Cool Gray 5. This is a great and efficient way to render form, which is our prompt this month. This will also help for our boxes to pop off the page a bit more, because while our sketching pencil is a great tool for our initial lines, it is going to be a lighter pencil because it has a harder lead. And if you want to do something a bit more complex, you can start to incorporate cast shadows into your drawing. So on my inner penetration boxes, we have a cast shadow from our vertical box, as it's going to obstruct the light from hitting the horizontal box. The next two items in our box are going to be the Copic Chow in YG03 and its larger sister marker, the Copic Sketch in YG06. Now each of these markers will come with a chisel nib and a brush nib. So we'll have the versatility of a brush nib and the strong, consistent lines of a chisel tip. And because both of these markers are from the YG color family, we can make some really nice gradients with them. So using our wet on wet technique of working quickly so those lines don't dry, we can layer our markers and create a more subtle gradient. So here I've gone with my YG03, and then I'm using a feathering technique with our YG06. That way we get a nicer, softer transition. What's nice about these markers working together is you can go from the darker color to the lighter, or the lighter to the darker. Now for this gradient, let's grab the next item in this month's box, the Pastel package from the Pastel company. This package includes a blending sponge and the beautiful bright yellow-green pastel pan. Now product designers have used Pastel for a really long time. It offers a really nice subtle gradient, almost kind of like an airbrush, but we can still get really nice sharp crisp details by using an eraser to erase some of that pastel off of our surface. Now another shape that's pivotal for product designers is going to be the ellipse. Every ellipse is comprised of a minor and a major axis, which will help us to put our ellipse in perspective. We can think of an ellipse as a circle in perspective. So the closer that circle is to our horizon line, the shorter that minor axis is going to be. And as we turn that cylinder towards us, that minor axis will extend and almost become a circle. To demonstrate this, I'm going to create a cylinder. I'm going to start by creating a rectangle, and that is going to be my major axis. I'll then add two ellipses to give a top and a bottom to our cylinder and erase any unnecessary lines. To create an even stronger sense of three-dimensional form, I'm going to take our YG03, fill in the top of our cylinder, and then use some bending lines with our feathering technique in order to establish a sense of three-dimensional form. And I'm going to leave a little gap of white between the top and the side of my cylinder, as this will help to give us a little bit more believability. It's rare to find anything with a perfect edge to it in the real world, so this little bevel is going to give us a lot of believability. Taking our YG06, I'll go in and establish a darker edge. That's going to be the more rounded portion, and we can add a secondary line to really imply that this is a very shiny object. Let's grab the next item in our box, the SketchBox Signature Blending Stump set. The points on these blending stumps are great for getting to more fine details, and they'll allow us to be a little bit more subtle with our pastel. Loading up my blending stump, I'll go over our transition point with our marker. That'll help to soften that. It'll also harmonize our colors a bit. Now I only want my strongest highlights to be that brilliant white of our paper, because everywhere else needs to be at least a little bit green so the material is represented accurately. So I'll erase out my strongest highlights with that eraser, and then go in with our sponge for my darkest areas. I'm also going to put a little bit on the top of our cylinder, just to harmonize those colors a bit. Let's grab the final item in this month's box, the Copic Multiliner in Olive. This 0.3mm liner is great for consistent lines, and we can always go over our lines again to thicken them up a bit. By breaking our lines, we can make them a bit more subtle, and by creating a series of lines, we can use a hatching technique. When working with hatching, we can create the illusion of value by more densely packing our lines together for darker areas. We can also use this at an angle, which is called cross-hatching. Now that we have a good understanding of our materials, and we walked through some of the techniques that product designers use, let's put everything we learned together and design a hairdryer. I'm going to start by blocking in a rectangle and then extending a line all the way down to the bottom for my handle. Next, I'll establish the two ellipses for the head of my dryer and use those ellipse lines to segment different areas. For where the handle meets the head of my dryer, I'm going to curve that line a bit as it needs to wrap into the cylindrical form of the head. Next, I'll add in a slider on the handle and a button on the back. These little details are going to be what really differentiates a good product design from a typical drawing. Next, I'll add in a cable and the electrical plug. And for the plug, I'm going to start by creating a rectangle in perspective. By starting with the overall shape of the plug first, we can use those lines as a reference point for any of the smaller details. Once I'm happy with my sketch, I'll go in with our Copic Multiliner and start to work on the outlines. For the slider, I'm making sure to make those lines a little bit inset, and if your lines aren't perfect, you can always go back in and thicken them up. The main thing here is to take your time. Line art is a slower process, so try not to rush it. Once our line art is fully dry, I'll go back in with our eraser to erase any unnecessary pencil lines, and use our Olo marker to differentiate different areas of our hairdryer. Now, because our hairdryer is the main focal point, I'm not going to worry too much about the plug or the cable, but I am going to go in and layer some of our Cool Gray 5 on top of that Cool Gray 3 so that we can get a better understanding of the form. I'm also going to use our cross-hatching technique on the slider just to imply a little bit of a texture. I also use the Cool Gray 6 in order to darken up the outtake and to imply a bit more shine to that metal side. And now time for my favorite part. So I'll start with the YG06 and I'm going to darken the area of the slider that'll be covered, as well as the turning corner of our hairdryer. Once that's set in, I'll go in with our YG03 and use our feathering technique to kind of soften that edge a bit. I'll follow it up with our blending stump and our pan pastel in order to create a more subtle gradient, and then touch up my darkest areas with that sponge. Anything that goes outside of my outlines, I'll clean up with my eraser, as well as creating a few strong highlights. As a final touch, I'll go back in with my Olo marker and darken up some areas. That way I have good contrast throughout. And with that, our design is complete. Hope you enjoyed the video, learned a few things, and if you post your work online, make sure you use hashtag SketchBoxAugust. We love seeing what y'all create each month. And if you want to share out any of our previous videos, head over to our YouTube channel where you can like and subscribe. Now next month, we're going to be changing up our videos a bit, as Lana Glowshat will be joining us to take over the educational content for our monthly boxes. Lana is an incredibly gifted artist and we're so excited for her to share her knowledge base with you. Now I'll still be a part of the SketchBox team, so I'm not going anywhere. I'm just going to be working on some different content that we're really excited to share with you. So until then, I'll see you around.